It was a sunny Tuesday afternoon when a young teen walked into the bank. His sneakers clicked against the polished floors as he approached the front desk, holding a folder of neatly organized documents in his hands. He had been looking forward to this moment for days. Today, he was opening his very first savings account. It was a small step, but one his father had told him was important for his future. The teen was excited, but a little nervous. He had read through the pamphlets online, prepared the necessary documents, and even had a few questions about the process. He wanted to make sure everything went smoothly. As he reached the front desk, he was greeted by a teller who at first glance seemed friendly enough. She smiled and asked how she could assist him. "I'd like to open a savings account, please," the teen said, his voice steady despite the butterflies in his stomach. The teller's smile faltered slightly, but she quickly regained composure. She gestured for him to take a seat at the desk across from her. The teen sat down and began to pull out his identification and documents, all prepared exactly as instructed on the bank's website. The bank teller, a middle-aged woman, glanced at the documents with a quick glance. Her eyes narrowed slightly before she picked up the phone and dialed a number. It wasn't unusual for tellers to double-check things now and then, but there was something about the way she did it that caught the teen's attention. His stomach turned. Was there something wrong? Had he done something wrong? As the phone rang, the teen started to feel uneasy. His heart raced, but he couldn't figure out why. He had followed all the rules. He had the right paperwork, the right ID, and the right attitude. Why was she so hesitant? It didn't make sense. The phone rang a few more times, then finally, the teller spoke into it in a low voice, barely audible to the teen. The teen sat quietly, trying not to look too anxious. After all, he was just here to open an account. He tried to stay calm, wondering what was going on. Was the process normally this complicated? He looked around at the other customers, a few of whom were filling out forms, and the employees who went about their work without seeming to notice anything out of the ordinary. It felt like just another day in the bank, except for the growing discomfort he felt in his chest. Minutes ticked by as the teller finished her phone call. When she hung up, she turned back toward the teen. Her smile was back, but it seemed forced now, as though she was trying too hard to act casual. "Okay," she said. "I just need you to wait here for a moment. I'm going to speak with my manager." The teen nodded, still unsure of what was happening. He sat back in the chair and glanced around once more. The bank seemed busy, but not in a chaotic way. The air conditioner hummed quietly in the background, and the sound of papers being shuffled and keyboards clicking filled the silence. But now everything seemed to be moving in slow motion. The teller stepped away from the desk, walking briskly toward the back office. The teen couldn't help but feel a sinking feeling in his stomach. He had hoped that this would be a quick and easy experience, but instead, it was becoming something far more stressful. As he sat there alone, a strange thought crossed his mind. Had he done something wrong without even realizing it? He had worn his best clothes that day, tried to be polite, and had come prepared. It didn't make sense. Why was he being treated this way? But then again, he couldn't help but remember the looks he had received when he first walked into the bank, the way people had eyed him as he made his way to the front desk. Had they seen him as a threat? As someone who didn't belong? The more he thought about it, the worse he felt. He had never been a troublemaker. He was just a teenager, trying to start his financial journey the right way. His father had always emphasized the importance of saving money and being responsible. And now here he was, trying to do just that. A few moments later, the bank manager, a middle-aged man in a suit, appeared from behind the counter. He walked toward the teen with a brisk pace, stopping a few feet away and glancing down at the papers the teen had handed the teller. "Hello," the manager said, offering a stiff smile. "I'm the branch manager. I just wanted to take a look at your documents." "It's part of our standard procedure." The teen nodded. "Of course," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. "I've got everything right here." The manager didn't say much as he took the paperwork from the teen's hands. He flipped through it quickly, checking each page as though trying to spot an error. The teen sat in silence, trying to remain as composed as possible. After what felt like an eternity, the manager nodded and handed the pap as the minutes ticked by. The teen's anxiety started to spiral. His mind raced with questions he couldn't answer, and he began to wonder if he was in some kind of trouble. He had never been in a situation like this before. He was just trying to open a bank account, something every teenager did when they reached a certain age. He had all the necessary paperwork, his identification, everything, but now he felt like an outsider, like his presence here was being questioned in ways he couldn't even understand. Time passed slowly, each minute stretching into what felt like hours. The bank was still busy, people coming in and out, conducting their business, unaware of what was happening in the corner where he sat. But to him, everything felt quiet, too quiet. It was as though the entire room had frozen around him, and the weight of the moment hung heavy. The teen tried to stay calm, but his mind couldn't help but return to the looks he had received when he first walked in. People had looked at him, and not in the usual friendly way you'd expect when entering a public place. No, these looks were different. There was something in their eyes that made him feel small. He had walked in confident and ready to take the next step in his life, but now, he felt as if he was being judged based on something beyond his control. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, trying not to stare at the staff who walked past him. They all seemed to avoid his gaze, their footsteps quick and purposeful as if they were avoiding him. He swallowed hard, hoping that this whole thing would soon be over. He had done nothing wrong. He had just followed the instructions, brought everything he was asked to, and yet here he was, being treated like an inconvenience. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the manager returned, walking quickly towards him. The teen looked up, hoping for some resolution, but the manager didn't speak right away. Instead, he paused and looked at the teen, his face a mix of concern and confusion. "Are you all right?" the manager asked, his voice softer than it had been before. The teen nodded, though his mind was far from calm. "I'm just waiting," he said, his voice shaky. The manager sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I know this must be frustrating. I want you to understand that we're just following procedures here, but I promise you, we'll get this sorted out." The teen didn't know how to respond. He didn't feel like it was just a procedural delay. It felt personal. He didn't want to accuse anyone of anything, but he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't about paperwork. Something about the way he had been treated didn't sit right with him. The manager leaned in slightly as if trying to offer some reassurance, but the words didn't seem to comfort the teen. "We've had to call a few people to verify your information. It's just a precaution, nothing more." A cold knot tightened in the teen's stomach. The manager had said it so casually, like it was just another part of the job. But to the teen, this didn't feel like a precaution. It felt like a red flag, something bigger than just a verification of information. "Who did you call?" the teen asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The manager hesitated, glancing at the back office. "Just some internal people. It's routine, I assure you." But to the teen, the word routine felt like an insult. This wasn't routine for him. He hadn't been warned that this might happen, and it was clear that this wasn't just a simple case of account verification. The way the manager was acting, the way the staff had avoided him, it all pointed to something more than just a paperwork issue. A few more minutes passed, and the teen felt his frustration growing. He wanted to speak up, to ask more questions, but he didn't want to make the situation worse. He had done everything right, so why was he the one being treated like this? Why hadn't anyone explained why he was still waiting? And why hadn't anyone acknowledged how uncomfortable this had all become? It was then that the teen saw the first real sign of what was going on. A few bank staff members, 3 women in total, walked past him, whispering to one another in hushed voices. He caught a few words of their conversation. One of the women said something about the young man, and then lowered her voice, clearly not wanting him to overhear. But he did. The teen's heart sank as he realized what they were talking about. They had made assumptions about him. And not just casual assumptions, no, they had made a decision based on his appearance. They had decided that he was somehow a risk. A few whispers, a few quick phone calls, and now the entire situation had escalated beyond anything the teen could have imagined. He sat there, stunned. He had always known that prejudice existed, but he never thought he'd experience it firsthand, especially not in a place like this, a place that was supposed to be professional and welcoming. He tried to shake off the feeling, tried to convince himself that maybe it was all a misunderstanding, but deep down, he knew. He knew what had happened before he could process everything. The manager returned once more, this time with 2 other people in tow. One of them was a man dressed in a dark suit, and the other was a woman who looked stern and no-nonsense. Both of them carried themselves with authority, and the way they approached him made it clear that this wasn't going to be a simple conversation. "We've had to call in some extra assistance to make sure everything is in order," the manager said, his voice no longer as reassuring as before. I'm afraid the minutes dragged on like hours. The teen sat alone in the uncomfortable chair, his palms sweaty as he tried to process what was happening. He had never been in a situation like this before. He had been nervous when he first arrived at the bank, but now that nervousness had turned into something much heavier. He felt like he was being punished for something he hadn't even done, and the longer he sat there, the more the weight of it all pressed down on him. His mind kept racing, replaying the moments when he first walked into the bank. The way the teller's smile had faltered. The way the manager had acted like something was wrong, even though he had done everything by the book. He had brought the right documents, followed the instructions, and asked all the right questions. Yet here he was, sitting in the middle of a situation he didn't understand. He had heard about things like this before, stories of people being treated unfairly because of their race. But he never thought it would happen to him. Not here. Not today. This was supposed to be a simple, straightforward process, but now it felt like the world had shifted, like everything he had been taught about fairness and equality was being called into question. The teen looked around the bank again, trying to make sense of it all. People were still going about their business, oblivious to what was happening in the corner. But he couldn't shake the feeling that all eyes were on him, even when they weren't. The feeling of being watched, of being judged, was suffocating. He shifted uncomfortably in the chair, his legs stiff from sitting still for so long. He couldn't understand why no one was telling him what was going on. Why had he been left here waiting in silence? Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the manager returned. He walked over slowly, his eyes avoiding the teens for a moment before finally meeting his gaze. There was a look of unease on his face, as though he didn't quite know what to say. The teen's heart sank. He knew that look. It was the look of someone who knew they had made a mistake but wasn't ready to admit it. "Hey, I'm really sorry about this," the manager said, his voice hesitant. "There's been a misunderstanding." The teen didn't say anything. He wasn't sure what to say. Part of him wanted to scream, to ask why this was happening, but another part of him just wanted to leave and never come back. He had come to the bank with such high hopes, but now all of that felt pointless. "I understand this must be frustrating," the manager continued, "but we're just following procedures. It's not personal." The teen shook his head slowly. "It feels personal." The manager looked down, unable to meet the teen's eyes. For a moment, the two of them sat in silence, neither knowing what to say. The teen was beyond frustrated. He had tried to remain calm, to stay polite, but now it was becoming impossible. He was angry. Angry that he had been treated like this, angry that he hadn't been given a chance to explain himself, and most of all, angry that he was being made to feel like he didn't belong. After a long pause, the manager finally spoke again. "We've had to make some calls," he said, almost apologetically, "just to make sure everything checks out. It's standard protocol, but I understand how this looks. I really do." The teen clenched his fists, trying to hold back the tears that were threatening to spill. He wasn't a kid anymore. He was growing up, trying to take control of his future. And yet here he was, being treated like an outsider, like he didn't belong. "I don't understand why this is happening," the teen said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm just trying to open an account. I haven't done anything wrong." The manager didn't respond right away. He just nodded as if he didn't know how to make this better. He seemed to understand the teen's frustration, but his words were hollow. There was nothing he could say to fix this. The teen glanced at the other bank employees who were still walking around as if nothing was wrong. They hadn't said a word, hadn't looked his way. They just kept going about their work, pretending like everything was fine. It was clear to him now. This wasn't about a mistake. This was something deeper. It was about assumptions, about how he was being treated differently because of the color of his skin. As the manager stepped away to make more calls, the teen sat in the chair, feeling more alone than ever. He wanted to leave, to walk out of the bank and never look back. But something held him there. Maybe it was the hope that things would improve. Maybe it was the desire to see this through, to prove that he had done nothing wrong. But most of all, it was the need for answers. He needed to know why this had happened. Then, just as he was starting to lose hope, the door to the back office opened again. The two agents who had been called in earlier reappeared. This time, however, there was something different about the way they carried themselves. The cold, detached attitude they had shown earlier was gone, replaced by something more thoughtful, more concerned. The male agent, the one who had been quiet before, stepped forward first. "We've verified everything," he said, his voice firm but not unfriendly. "There was no issue with your identification. Everything checks out." The teen let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. For the first time since he had walked into the bank, he felt a small sense of relief. He wasn't in trouble. They weren't going to arrest him or charge him with anything. But that didn't make everything right. It didn't change the fact that he had been made to feel like a criminal when all he had done was try to open a savings account. "We're very sorry for the inconvenience," the agent continued, "but I'm afraid we still need to speak with the bank staff about this situation. We'll make sure this doesn't happen again." The teen nodded, though he didn't feel better. In fact, he felt more confused than ever. The agents had cleared everything up, but it didn't explain why the bank staff had acted the way they did. Why had they treated him like this in the first place? Why hadn't anyone stepped in sooner to stop it? As the teen sat at the desk, completing the final steps to open his account, a strange silence fell over him. The process that had seemed so straightforward when he walked into the bank was now a distant memory. Everything had taken much longer than expected, and the awkwardness between him and the staff lingered in the air like a cloud. He glanced around the room, noticing the subtle shifts in how people behaved toward him. The tellers, who had once seemed like just another part of the bank's routine, now seemed to avoid his gaze. The manager, who had apologized so many times, still wore a mask of discomfort, like he wasn't sure what to do next. Even the two agents who had helped verify his information seemed to regard him with a new form of understanding, but it didn't feel like enough. None of it felt real. The teen's mind was still spinning. What had just happened? Why had this entire ordeal even started? He hadn't done anything wrong. He had walked into the bank that day like any other customer, hoping to take a simple step in building his future. But instead, he found himself caught in the middle of an unnecessary and uncomfortable situation. His nerves, once on edge, now felt more like exhaustion. There was a heaviness to it all that weighed on him, like the emotional toll of everything was starting to take its toll. He finished signing the final papers, the manager sitting across from him, eyes avoiding his as he did so. The bank had finally processed everything, but the teen wasn't sure if he even felt proud of what he had just accomplished. The account was open, the paperwork done, but the emotional scars felt far deeper. What should have been a moment of excitement, getting his first savings account, had turned into something he could never forget. This wasn't just about opening a bank account anymore. This was about being seen differently, unfairly. As an manager handed him the welcome packet for his new account, he offered one final apology. "I truly am sorry for the way things went today," he said, his voice low. "This shouldn't have happened." The teen didn't know how to respond. He had heard the apology over and over again, and each time, it felt emptier than the last. It was like the manager was trying to fix something that couldn't be fixed with a few polite words. The teen didn't need more apologies. He needed understanding. He needed a world where people saw him for who he was, and not just what they thought he might be. "Thank you," the teen said, his voice quiet but firm. It wasn't an expression of gratitude, but rather the acknowledgement that the process was over. He was ready to leave, even though he knew that walking out of the bank wouldn't erase the feelings he carried with him. The experience would stay with him as it stayed with many others in his position, whether they liked it or not. As he walked toward the exit, he heard the soft murmur of voices behind him, but he didn't turn around. The last thing he wanted was another apology. Another uncomfortable conversation. He just wanted to leave. To get away from the stares, the whispers, and the weight of being treated like an outsider in a place that was supposed to be welcoming. But as he reached for the door, he paused. Something inside him wanted to say something more. Something inside him wanted to demand answers, to ask why the bank had made him feel like a criminal when all he had done was walk in with good intentions. But instead of saying anything, he simply walked out, the door swinging shut behind him with a soft chime. The air outside felt cooler, fresher. For a brief moment, he stood there on the sidewalk, taking in a deep breath. He needed to clear his head. This whole experience had shaken him more than he cared to admit. He had grown up hearing stories of discrimination, of people being treated unfairly because of their race, but it was always someone else in those stories. He had never imagined he'd be the one caught in the middle of it. The teen walked aimlessly for a few blocks, his feet moving on their own as his mind replayed every moment in the bank. He couldn't shake the image of the tellers. The following days felt heavy. It wasn't that the teen had forgotten about the incident at the bank, but he had tried to push it to the back of his mind, hoping that life would return to normal. But it didn't. Every time he went out, he couldn't help but feel the weight of the world on his shoulders, the quiet assumption that he didn't belong. His confidence, which had once been strong, now felt fragile, like it could shatter at any moment. School was no different. His classmates were mostly kind, but there was always that feeling of being watched, scrutinized in ways he couldn't explain. People smiled at him, but sometimes their eyes lingered too long as if they saw something he didn't. He wasn't paranoid. He knew what was happening. He had seen it too many times before. The looks, the whispers, the subtle signs that said he didn't quite fit in, that he was different. The teen tried to focus on his schoolwork, tried to keep his mind occupied. He had dreams of making something of himself, of proving to everyone, including himself, that he was capable of achieving great things. But those dreams felt distant now, clouded by the events of that day. What should have been a simple task, a routine trip to the bank, had turned into a lesson in the harsh realities of life. One afternoon, a few days after the incident, he sat in his room, staring out the window. It was a calm day, the sky clear and blue, but his mind was far from peaceful. He had been avoiding his friends for the past couple of days, not knowing how to talk about what had happened. It wasn't something he could easily explain. How could he tell them that he had been treated differently for no reason other than the color of his skin? How could he make them understand that the world wasn't as fair as they thought? It wasn't long before his phone buzzed, snapping him out of his thoughts. He looked down at the screen and saw a message from one of his closest friends. It was a simple text asking if he wanted to hang out that afternoon. He hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to respond. Part of him wanted to say no, to stay home and avoid the world. But another part of him knew that he couldn't keep running away from it. He had to face it. He had to keep moving forward. He quickly typed a reply agreeing to meet up. Maybe, just maybe, getting out of his own head would help him feel better. When they met later that afternoon, the teen's friend greeted him with a wide smile, his usual energy radiating as they walked to the park. They talked about school, about their plans for the weekend, but the teen couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't that his friend had changed, but the teen felt like a part of him was missing, like he wasn't really there. He had built up walls in the past few days, and now, those walls were keeping him from fully connecting with those around him. They sat on a bench by the pond, watching the ducks swim lazily in the water. His friend continued to chat about the latest video game he had been playing, but the teen couldn't focus. His mind kept drifting back to that day at the bank. The words that had been said, the looks that had been given. He wanted to speak up, to share his feelings, but the words felt trapped in his throat. Finally, after a long silence, his friend looked over at him, his expression softening when he noticed the teen's distant gaze. "Hey, you've been really quiet today. Is everything okay?" The teen took a deep breath. It was now or never. He had to say something. "I've been better," he said, his voice quiet. "Actually, I've been kind of struggling with something." His friend's expression turned concerned. What happened? The teen hesitated, unsure of how to put it into words. How could he explain what had happened without sounding like he was overreacting? How could he explain that he had been treated like he didn't matter just because of how he looked? "I went to the bank the other day to open an account," he began, "and everything seemed fine at first. But then the staff started acting weird. They kept looking at me like I didn't belong there. And then they called the police on me." He paused, trying to let his words sink in. It was like I was automatically a suspect just because of the way I look. His friend's face contorted in confusion, then slowly turned into disbelief.
Wait, what?
They called the police on you? But why? The teen shook his head, his frustration growing. I don't know. I did everything right. I had the right documents, the right ID. I was just trying to open an account like any other person would. But they treated me like I was a criminal, like I was trying to do something wrong. It was like they didn't even see me as a person. There was a long pause. His friend stared at him, processing what he had just heard. Finally he spoke, his voice calm but with an edge of anger. That's messed up. I can't believe that happened to you. That's not right. The teen nodded, but his heart felt heavy. It was comforting to hear his friend's support, but it didn't make what had happened any easier to bear. Yeah, but the worst part is, I'm not sure it's the first time something like this has happened. Maybe not to me, but to people like me. You hear stories about stuff like this all the time, right? His friend nodded slowly. Yeah, I get that. But the teen woke up the next morning with a sense of calm that had been missing for the past few days. The events of the bank were still fresh in his mind, but the weight of them no longer felt as heavy. He had spent hours thinking about the conversations he had had with his friend, and something about hearing someone else validate his feelings had sparked a shift inside him. Maybe he couldn't change what had happened, but he could change how he let it affect him. He got out of bed and walked over to his desk, where he had some schoolwork to finish. The day ahead felt different, lighter somehow. As he sat down, he realized that his focus had shifted. The pain he had been feeling had started to turn into something else, something more productive. He had a new sense of purpose. He picked up his phone and went through his messages, and there it was, a message from his mom. She had been supportive ever since the incident at the bank, but something in her message felt different today. Hey, I was thinking about what you said yesterday, and I wanted to talk. I think it's time we do something about it. His heart skipped a beat. He had no idea what she meant, but he could feel the determination in her words. His mom was a strong woman, and whenever she set her mind to something, it was as if the world couldn't stand in her way. He quickly typed back, "What do you mean? What do you want to do?" She responded almost immediately, "Let's have a conversation about it. Meet me in the kitchen in 10 minutes. We'll figure it out." The teen felt a surge of curiosity. His mom had always been there for him, but today something told him that this conversation was going to be different. He walked into the kitchen where his mom was sitting with a cup of coffee, looking thoughtful. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened to you," she began, "and it made me realize something. We can't let this go, not just for you, but for everyone. This kind of thing happens too often, and we've been letting it slide for far too long." He sat down across from her, his stomach tightening with anticipation. His mom wasn't one to speak lightly. When she made up her mind, there was no turning back. "I don't want you to feel like this experience defines you," she continued, "but I also don't want you to stay silent about it. You don't have to carry this weight alone." Her words hit him harder than he expected. He had been trying to move on, trying to put the experience behind him, but he had also been feeling the pressure of staying silent. He hadn't wanted to make a big deal out of it, thinking it might be easier to just let it go. But his mom's words made him realize that staying silent wasn't the answer. "Not anymore. I know you don't want to cause a scene," she said gently, "but sometimes when things like this happen, it's important to speak up. For you, for people who can't speak for themselves, and for the future." The teen looked down at his hands, thinking, it wasn't just about him, was it? This wasn't an isolated incident. His experience was part of a bigger problem, one that affected many people who didn't have the privilege of being heard. The teen's thoughts swirled as he tried to make sense of it all. He had been angry and hurt, but he had also been passive. He hadn't wanted to cause trouble. But his mom was right. If he didn't speak up, things would stay the same, so, "What do we do?" he asked, his voice small. "We take action," she said firmly. "You're not alone in this. We'll find a way to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. It's time for people to understand that this kind of behavior won't be tolerated." The teen's mind raced. He had no idea what taking action would look like, but he trusted his mom. If anyone could figure it out, it was her. "Okay," he said, his voice stronger now. "What's the first step?" His mom smiled, a look of determination crossing her face. "The first step is making sure your story is heard. We'll contact the bank, of course, but we're also going to bring this to the people who need to hear it. We'll stand up for what's right, and we'll make sure that something positive comes out of this situation." As his mom continued to speak, the teen felt a fire ignite inside him. He had always known that he wanted to do something important with his life, to make a difference. But in that moment, he realized that making a difference didn't always require grand gestures. Sometimes it started with simply standing up for yourself and those who couldn't stand up for themselves. Over the next few days, the teen and his mom worked together to document everything that had happened at the bank. They wrote down every detail, from the strange looks he had received to the moment the police had arrived. They made a list of the people who had been involved and reached out to others who had witnessed the situation. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when the teen felt overwhelmed by the process. But each time he doubted himself, his mom reminded him of why it was important. He was speaking up not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever felt silenced by the world around them. A week later, they submitted their report to the bank. The teen's heart pounded as they hit the send button. He knew that what they were doing wasn't going to be easy. The bank could ignore them, or they could retaliate in some way. But the teen was ready for whatever came next. He had already made up his mind. He wasn't going to back down. The next day, they received a response from the bank. The tone was polite but firm, and the teen's stomach churned as he read the email. The bank had acknowledged his complaint and assured him that they were taking the matter seriously. But the teen didn't feel satisfied. The apology felt empty, like a box they were checking off, not a true acknowledgement of the hurt he had experienced. Still, he didn't let it discourage him. This was just the beginning. There was more work to do, and he was ready to do it. Days turned into weeks, and the teen began to notice small changes. When he walked into a room, he no longer felt invisible. He had a quiet confidence now, a strength that came from knowing that he had done the right thing. He wasn't just walking through life anymore. He was actively shaping his future, standing up for the things that mattered. One afternoon, as he sat in the park again, this time with a group of friends, he realized something important. The world wasn't perfect, and he would never be able to change everything. But he could make a difference in his own life. He could choose to be the person who didn't stay silent, and that was enough for now. He looked around at his friends, at the people who had supported him along the way. And in that moment, he knew that he wasn't alone. He had found his voice, and he wasn't afraid to use it. It's still messed up. People shouldn't be treated that way. I mean, I can't imagine what it must feel like to go through something like that. The teen's chest tightened. It sucks. And it's not just the bank. It's everywhere. You can't help but wonder if people are looking at you differently, judging you based on things you can't control. I've had a lot of moments where I feel like I'm just invisible, like I'm being ignored or pushed aside. His friend didn't know what to say at first, but then he put a hand on his shoulder. "I'm sorry. I wish I could make it better." "But you're not invisible, man. You matter. You belong. And no one can take that away from you." The teen's heart softened at the sincerity in his friend's words. For a brief moment, he felt like maybe things could be okay. Maybe the world wasn't all bad. Maybe, just maybe, there were people who would stand up for him, who would see him for who he truly was. "Thanks," the teen said, his voice thick. "I really needed to hear that." As they sat there in silence, watching the sun set over the park, the teen realized something important. He had been letting the events at the bank control his feelings, his thoughts. But the truth was, he was more than what happened to him that day. He was more than the way the bank staff had treated him. He was a person with dreams, with goals, with the potential to change the world, and that, he decided, was something no one could take away. Nervous glances, the way the manager had looked at him with unease. And the two agents, they hadn't even offered a smile or a friendly word. It was as though he was something to be handled, not a person to be treated with respect. By the time he reached a nearby park, he was exhausted. His thoughts felt like a jumbled mess, and all he wanted was to forget what had just happened. He found an empty bench and sat down, staring at the ground, letting the cool breeze wash over him. He needed time to process everything. As he sat there trying to make sense of it all, he noticed a couple walking by. They smiled at him, nodding politely as they passed. For the first time that day, he felt like he was treated like a human being. It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind him that not everyone saw him the way the bank staff had. There were still good people out there, people who didn't make assumptions based on appearance, people who understood that everyone deserved respect. It made him realize that while the experience at the bank was painful, it didn't define him. He wouldn't let it define him. He had made it through, and that was something. He wasn't going to let the actions of a few people take away his confidence or his drive to succeed. If anything, it only fueled his determination to rise above it. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of pink and orange, the teen stood up from the bench. He took one last look at the park, feeling a sense of calm wash over him. He had come to terms with the fact that this was just one small moment in his life, one small setback. There would be other days, other challenges, and he would face them head-on. He walked back home with a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead wouldn't always be easy. There would be more moments where he would have to prove himself, to show that he was worthy of respect and fairness. But he was ready. He knew who he was, and he knew what he was capable of. No one could take that away from him. The teen knew that the road to change would be long, but he was willing to walk it. And as he entered his home, he smiled, realizing that no matter what, he was still moving forward. The experience at the bank wouldn't stop him. It couldn't. He was stronger than that. Ance walked away. The manager returned. He looked at the teen, his expression now one of regret. "I really do apologize," the manager said again, though his words seemed less genuine now. "This was a mistake on our part. I promise we'll do everything we can to make sure this doesn't happen again." But the teen wasn't listening. He had heard the apology before, and it didn't make things any better. It didn't change the fact that he had been made to feel like he didn't belong. "I just want to open an account," he said quietly, his voice thick with frustration. "That's all." The manager nodded, looking uncomfortable. He led the teen to a new desk, one where the process was completed quickly without any further problems. But the teen couldn't shake the feeling that something important had been lost. He had come into the bank hoping for a smooth, simple experience. But instead, he had walked away with a bitter reminder of the prejudices that still existed in the world. "We have some concerns regarding your identification." The teen's blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice cracking. The woman in the suit spoke up, her tone clinical and detached. "We just need to verify everything. It's a standard process, nothing personal." But the teen knew it was personal. It had always been personal. "I haven't done anything wrong," the teen said, his frustration rising. "I'm just here to open an account. I don't know why this is happening." The two new arrivals exchanged a look, but neither of them said anything. The man in the suit stepped forward and spoke, his voice stern. "We're just going to take a few minutes to check on this. Please remain seated." The teen's heart raced as the woman and the man walked away, leaving him with the manager. He sat there confused, hurt, and more than a little scared. What was happening? How had things gone so wrong? And why wasn't anyone telling him what was going on? The manager didn't speak. Instead, he seemed to be waiting for something, watching the teen with an expression that was hard to read. For a long moment, there was only silence, and the teen was left alone with his thoughts, trapped in a situation he didn't understand. He had come into the bank with high hopes, eager to take the next step toward adulthood. But now it seemed as though everything had gone terribly wrong. The teen's mind was spinning, but one thing was clear. He needed answers, and he wasn't sure if he'd get them to his back. "There's just one thing," the manager said, his voice quieter now. "I'm going to have to ask you to wait here for a moment." The teen's heart skipped a beat. "What's going on?" he asked, barely able to keep the worry out of his voice. The manager hesitated for a moment. "It's just standard protocol," he said, avoiding the teen's eyes. "Please wait here and I'll have someone come by shortly." The teen sat in silence once more, his mind racing with confusion. He had done everything right. What could possibly be wrong now? He watched as the manager walked away, disappearing into the back office. He was left alone, trapped in the uncertainty of it all. It felt like everyone in the bank was avoiding eye contact, and the once bustling atmosphere of the place seemed to have shifted into something more oppressive. The teen could feel the eyes of the other customers on him, their silent judgment weighing heavily. He had heard stories before, about how people of color sometimes faced extra scrutiny in places where they should have felt safe. But he never thought it would happen to him. Not here, not today. The teen had always been taught that everyone deserved to be treated fairly, but now he wasn't so sure. Had he been singled out because of his appearance? Was that why the bank staff seemed so unsure of him from the start? As minutes passed and no one returned to speak with him, The teen's anxiety grew. He shifted in his seat, glancing at his watch. This was taking longer than he had ever imagined. He had hoped to be in and out of the bank quickly, but now it felt like he was stuck in an uncomfortable waiting game, the outcome uncertain and the clock ticking louder with each passing moment.